really can make a big difference in the morale of the team. One definition of encouragement is to put courage in. You know, discouragement, take courage out. Encouragement, put courage in to the different team members around us. Team members strive to maintain unity. Romans 12:16, be of the same mind, one toward another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceits. So what are we saying here? Humility is important when you're on a team. First place, I think we ought to really be grateful to God and to the team that God has placed us on. That we can even be here because, again, we said that leadership is by invitation, so the senior leader of the team probably invited me on the team. The others agreed with that. But most of all, we have to think about the fact is that really it's God's team. God put us here. And we ought to be really thankful and grateful and appreciative. Number 16. Team members admonish one another, and if I myself also am persuaded of you, my brethren, that ye also are full of goodness, filled with all knowledge, able also to admonish one another. So they admonish one another. Number 17, team members have counted the cost. The great preacher C.T. Studd, the founder of Worldwide Evangelical Crusade, wrote from the Congo at one time, and I like this. Listen to this. He says, send us people with initiative, who can carry themselves and others too. Such as need to be carried, hamper the work, and weaken those who should be spending their strength for the heathen. Weaklings should be nursed at home. If any have jealousy, pride, or tale-bearing traits lurking about them, do not send them, nor any who are prone to criticize. Send only Pauls and Timothys, men who are full of zeal, holiness, and power. All others are hindrances. If you send us 10 such men, the work will be done. Quantity is nothing. Quality is what matters. Don't you like old Stud? He's the man, ain't he? Stud says, I ain't jacking around. Don't send me no junk. Woo, I think it's awesome. It is awesome. Oh, man. So there's no point in denying the cost of serving a worthwhile team. Excuse me. Get something out here. A worthwhile team. The Lord matches us to the enemy so that victory is assured, but not without a fight. Serving the local church or directly on the field is a declaration of war to the enemy. One must count the cost up front and commit to the price and do the job. It is great men like Studd that see breakthrough in the hardened areas. Sharing the joy and the blessing of being on a team is magnificent and challenging. Those who see God's grace, their efforts with His glory and anointing have counted the cost and surrendered to the call. When God calls and sends us, we simply obey. To put requirements on God, stipulations, or continually test Him is to resist Him. Just pray and obey. In the end, no matter what price you pay, it will be worth it all. So be tough and push through. I remember when I come out of Southwestern back in about 83, man, you know, I was so wanting to serve the Lord. I felt a call on my life. And I'd do anything. And if somebody said, you're not going to get paid, you know what? That's going to make it tough, but I don't care. You know, I feel called of God. I'm going to serve and I'm going to do it. But I'm going to tell you what. I work at a Bible college with, thousands of students. And I see graduates all the time. And I've been seeing this for years. Well, I'm not going over there and pastor that church because they don't pay enough. Well, I'm not going over here because there's just not enough. It's like things have changed so much from when I was young. Everybody that I went to school with, when I was a young man, it was all about serving the Lord, and it was such a privilege to serve God. If you got money, that was just icing on top of cake, You were willing to work hard, provide for your family, and work full-time again in your church for free if that's what required. But it seems like we somehow have lost that value, that passion in our young candidates that are coming out of training to go to the field. And I've seen guys wait for years that wouldn't take a job, a pastoral or a ministry position, though they were supposedly called, they've been trained and were ready, and years would pass because, nobody's offered me a job yet in a church that pays enough, and stuff like that. And I'm looking at them, I'm thinking, but you're working down here at the freight dock, for less or no more than what they're offering you, but you got too much pride to go there. That's what it is. You got too much pride to go there and be the pastor of that church and build that thing up and see God bless it and probably make a decent living one day. But no, you're going to stay down here And I don't want to say they're useless, you know what I'm saying? But they're almost useless. And it's a real common practice. We have a, CF&I is comprised of multiple, probably 20 apartment complexes. I don't mean single buildings. I mean, in other words, they bought out complexes of multiple. In other words, there's probably 50 apartment buildings, you know. Y'all follow what I'm saying? If you've ever been there, they bought out that whole hillside between 67 and 35. Every bit of that belongs to them now, including the old Sheraton. It's this tall. It's this tall. You know, you'll see it in the Y. It's taller than that. Big old tall building, you know, and it says real big, Christ for the Nations. Well, so they've got literally thousands of rooms, okay, or apartments. One section that they bought out is totally filled. Now, there's probably, you know what, I said 50. They probably have 100 complexes. Not, well, anyway, yeah, complexes. Because there's probably 20 different buildings that each have like 6 apartments. Probably 20 of those are what they call it COP, Courts of Praise. You know, they do change the names. When they buy these apartment complexes out, they'll give it a Christian name. So, Courts of Praise, and it's strictly for alumni, students that have graduated that never have left the campus. Some of them have been living there for 20 years, guys, in the COP apartments. It's a big unit. The apartments are bigger. They're 2- and 3-bedroom apartments, you know, for families. And there's probably 100 families, 200 families. I don't know how many live in there. They don't go to CF&I anymore. Some of them may be involved in ministries in Dallas, but the majority of them are still working on the freight dock, or they're working in the grocery store, or something else. They've never left Utopia. You know what I'm saying? And some of them still go to the Tuesday night chapel services. Some of them will sneak into morning praise and worship, and they've been doing it for years and never, ever taken their training and calling and gone on with the ministry. They're still living right there. Something's wrong with that picture to me, you know. And, of course, unfortunately, it's a joke around campus. Every once in a while, somebody will tease a student about, well, you're graduating, you know, they'll say, you're graduating in May. Are you going off to a place of ministry, or are you going to move into COP? And everybody laughs, you know, because it's such a shame. Okay, the job of the missions committee, if assuming you are at a place and you want to form some type of a nice committee to help further this aspect of missions in your church, and also it relieves some of the burden of the pastor. Obviously, you need someone over the committee, and the pastor's not going to have time, so you would have a missions director or a missions pastor. You could call them what you want, committee leader or whatever, but they would kind of work as a group together. And some of the job functions or responsibilities that they would have, they would help to make some policy decisions and recommendations. Obviously, the pastor needs, you know, he's going to have his final say-so on these things and put the stamp on it. But they can help by weeding out unnecessary guidelines and suggestions and then pass it on to him for his consideration. Establish the organization. In other words, what exactly, along with the pastor, they can help determine what exactly is it that we want to do in the area of being a Great Commission church. What does God want us to do? So they can work out some of these things. They can begin to plot some strategy. Maybe set some goals. Maybe evaluate the finances, whatever. Some churches give a portion of their budget to missions, and then the committee has at least they can make recommendations. In some churches, they make the decision. Some places, the missions director does some of that, and with the committee's help, and sometimes it's all left up, the final decision, to the pastor or to the elder board. In other words, there's all kinds of ways that you might work it out in the end, but they can look at it. Some churches don't really have anything in the budget at the time when they start to dedicate to missions. So sometimes what they'll do is they'll just start out by establishing a missions prayer time, you know, sometime. Anybody wants to participate, and they'll begin to pray for finances for missions, pray for missionaries and things, so you're contributing to missions. Sometimes they'll begin by getting with the pastor and finding out, can we have a missionary come through, and maybe our support that, you know, sometimes missionaries can be supported by individual support. People saying, hey, I'll send them $15 a month, I'll send $50 or what have you, and the best program method is generally, rather than have them send it directly to missionary, let them send it to the church, and the church runs it through the missions department, and at least by doing that, the church never actually, in that case, contributes any additional money. They can, but they don't have to. But it shows what's flowing out of our church into missions. Even though it may not have been given to the church and said, give it to whoever you want, we still know our people are supporting missions, and this is how much came through here this year, that type of thing. And then you can go from there as far as what you want to do otherwise. Specific task, missions policy, missions communication, raising finances, administering finances, prayer correspondence, annual missions events, missions education, care for missionaries, missionary recruitment, liaison and missions agency, short-term trips, missionary preparation. These are all things that the missions committee can begin to discuss and deliberate on. What things do we want to do? How are we going to begin to do them? And just kind of begin to develop their identity as a missions program. Goal statements. Purpose, long range, and short range. What is our job, first of all? Why are we in this role, and why are we on this little committee? What authority do we have? What needs to be sent to the pastor for his approval? What needs to be sent to the elders? Or what can we decide on our own? Things like that. Long range, more than 1 year. What do we see ourselves doing? What would we like to see? What do we think God wants us to be doing by this time next year? Okay, what about less than a year? What about in 6 months from now? And things like that. So you can just begin. And I would suggest to any church that's starting out fresh to start out within something reasonable. You know, in other words, we're not going to build a $2 million Bible college in Ghana, West Africa, our first year, when our church budget's only $100,000 a year. You know, I mean, yes, you want to use faith, but you got to also be reasonable. You know, so that, you know, because otherwise we can discourage ourselves. And then build it as you grow. Team responsibilities for committees. There's quite a bit here. But so I'm not going to even read all of these here, but there are multiple responsibilities. And of course, as you in your program grow and as you begin to develop your program, some of these won't apply to you. You'll just say, well, we're not going to do that. You know, that's not going to fit in with our vision or our goal. But then some of the others will help you in knowing some of the responsibilities that the committee can handle. Team commitments for committees. Just some basic stuff that would apply to almost all commitment, but we'll read a few. We will honor and submit to our church leaders. Now, obviously, like any ministry within the church, you don't want a rogue ministry. You don't want a ministry that's all of a sudden gone off on its own, that's trying to hide things from the church and all that type of stuff. So it needs to honor and submit to the church leaders. We will be judged by the vision and values of the church. So the way I always word that is everything gets filtered through the overall vision of the church. Does our missions vision, does it filter? Does it fit well with the vision that the church has? We will support the ministry objectives of the church. We will seek to be winsome, positive encouragers and educators. We will pray faithfully for the church, its leaders, its ministries, and its outreach. We will commit to personal growth in missions. We will love each other, even when we disagree. We will try to keep things simple. So it's real simple, real basic, but these kind of things help us stay in focus and help us stay balanced in our representation and our responsibilities as a missions committee. We will be strategic. We will focus on spiritual needs and opportunities. We'll focus on people to be reached and results for the kingdom rather than on dollars raised or numbers of people supported or sent. We will avoid becoming a catch-all for miscellaneous non-missions ministries and projects. We will work in cooperation with our denomination where possible. We will cooperate with other churches, organizations, missionaries, national churches where possible. And we'll look to educate and involve the congregation. I might jump back up to the one that said we will avoid becoming a catch-all for miscellaneous non-missions ministries and projects. There's always a temptation when sometimes when ministries or needs or potential opportunities come about, there's always can be a temptation for some people to want to immediately try to categorize it as a missions endeavor. And it may not be. It may just be someone well-meaning thought thought of how to get some support, financial support, and they want to pull it out of the missions budget. It also could be that it is a good, justifiable missions project, but it just simply doesn't fit with what the committee and the pastor and the church overall has said we're going to do for missions. And so if it doesn't fit in the vision, then we're going to probably have to say, well, we can't help in that. Keys for missions committee operation. You want to define your task. So you want to define missions for the church. Draw boundaries. Determine responsibilities. You want to determine what qualities and skills that are needed. And pray for what you need. Watch for individuals with the right qualities and recruit them. You know, you can pray people into positions. I've done that when I was a pastor. Well, Laurie and I do that all the time. She'd tell me I need a certain type of a musician. And she'd start praying about it. And boy, I'm telling you what, I just sit back and marvel how quick somebody would walk into church if there was nobody there. And usually they would walk in and they'd usually just fit into our program beautifully. It was just like God answered her prayer, you know. I've seen this happen many times. I've done this many times when I needed certain individuals. If God would lay something on my heart about a ministry, and the first principle I always look at is, if I don't have a leader, I'm not starting, because I can't lead everything. And I would always look for someone, and sure enough, sooner or later, someone would show up in church. Or occasionally, I would finally find out that someone that's been there a long time had been trained in that area. They already had a burden for that area. You know, they'd been praying and waiting for God to open a door, and he finally spoke to me, and I didn't even know they were praying. And all of a sudden, it comes out, and we realize that we both are on the same page, and we're like, God has already provided, you know. So prayer is powerful when you start wanting to, see needs met and things come together like that. Keep learning and growing. Find out how you can learn best. Identify appropriate resources and tools. And hold yourselves accountable. Missions, on a global perspective, is changing so rapidly now. Of course, it's because we're living in the last days. It's like everything's escalated, that you really almost have to keep up with it weekly, if not daily, about what's going on and where are the hot spots and how to pray. I mean, there's so much conflict between religions now, Islam and Christianity. Just there's stuff going on with the Catholic Church, you know, these days. All kinds of things. And you want to pray because of their influence. These religions have great influence in nations of the world. And we want to know so we know how to pray for those nations and people. Again, I recommend to you that the book, I recommended to you last night, that's called, I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, it's the one I recommended to you last night. No, not that one. The one I told you that tells about every different nation. It gives you statistics and it gives you their needs to pray for. It's, well, anyway, it's on the first part of the tape. Whatever. I can't even think of what the name of it is right now. We want to divide up the work for task teams. Determine the teams that you need. Find a good leader who has a passion for the area and help the leader lay out a plan. Delegation is what we're describing here. Once you've got a committee or a team, then you're going to have different aspects that need to be fulfilled and carried out. So pass those things on. What that does is it does a wonderful thing to your congregation. It gets them involved. Because now you've got a missions director, perhaps. Now you're going to form a little committee group who has further people who have a burden and a vision for missions. And then out of that group, as they, along with the pastor's approval, begin to determine the different aspects and tasks and responsibilities that they want to see covered in the church, then out of that group, you can appoint leaders who actually begin to carry out those projects. And before long, they're recruiting people to help them. You can have half your church involved in missions. And it's not an overwhelming burden for anybody because we've shared the load so much and spread it out so much. Now we're all enjoying an aspect of leadership in some degree, and we're all continually being reminded of this global perspective that we are reaching for. And what a wonderful way it is to keep the whole church involved by involving as many as possible. Develop and use good policies and procedures. People don't really know what to do or what not to do if we don't give them some guidelines. You're going to run into a few people that if you hand them some guidelines and say, oh, by the way, here's some guidelines we want you to abide by, you'll run into a few people who will buck up, and they have this liberty concept, that when I serve God, I'm spirit-led, and you don't tell me what I can and can't do. Well, you don't need those kind of leaders anyway. Let them do that anywhere they want to do it at any time. You know what I'm saying? But when you're on my committee, here's what we're going to do. We're going to accomplish something, okay? We have some goals in mind. So we're going to just simply say, here's some things we'd like to ask you to do. We'd like you to ask you to continue coming to our church as long as you're going to be on this committee. Hello? You know, simple stuff like that. You'd be surprised how sometimes people, I've had this happen. People change your church. You don't even know they've changed your church. Everybody in town knows they're going somewhere else. And they still running something over at your church. I've had this happen a couple times. And I'm like, whoa, no, you don't. Hold on. You know, I understand if God really moved you, that's fine. Let us pray and send you out. But you can't sneak off somewhere else and say you're going to church there, but you still want to control this ministry over here. I had somebody do that with a food pantry one time. We had a real large food pantry in Atlanta. We were feeding, we got up to 32,000 meals a year the last year that I was there. But this happened a few years before that. But we still were feeding a lot of people. We had a whole room dedicated. We had freezers and the whole thing. We were open 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. And I had someone working in the food pantry that was in a leadership role, supervisory role. And I found out they changed churches and still were over here, planning the schedule of who was going to work what shift and ordering food and all kinds of stuff. You appreciate the leadership and you appreciate the work that these people are doing, but you're not even in our church anymore. Yes, you can come and volunteer from another church. We had people do that. But how can you represent our church if you don't have the heartbeat of our church? If you're not coming to church here, if you're not sharing in this vision now, you're part of another vision now. Yeah, you can be a volunteer, but you can't be in that level of leadership and not go to church here. No, so that's what I mean by guidelines. And they got mad at me because they said I was trying to be controlling. And I said, I'm not trying to be controlling. I said, you can't, I can't remember exactly what I told them, but I said, you can't work at which we had at Brookshire's. I said, you can't work at Brookshire's and go over here to this other store. It was another little grocery store in town. I can't remember what it was. And make managerial level decisions for the employees in the other store, but you're working over here, actually. I said, that ain't going to fly. That's just normal. Anyway, so people get some crazy ideas. Plan ahead and follow your plans. Make your church leaders heroes. And really, that's probably not a good term to use, but just be sure that you're praying for your leaders all the time, and be sure that you recognize them occasionally. Something that always worked well for me is on occasions, I would tell a story about something that happened in the missions department or in the food bank or in the daycare or whatever in the ministry. I try to remember everybody as the Lord would help me, and just give a praise report of what a good job they were doing and recognize them. Call them by name. Give some statistics or facts of what they were doing. And that encourages people because it makes them know that you really are paying attention to what's going on. It lets them know that you care, that you really appreciate it. People are funny, but people feel like the senior pastor represents the Lord to them. And they feel like if the senior pastor doesn't let it be known that he's pleased with what they're doing for God, sometimes people start feeling like, well, the Lord don't care either. But the Lord does care, even if the senior pastor fails to let them know that. So I try to consider that people want to know that the Lord is proud of them, and I'm proud of them, and that their effort is a much, much appreciated effort. Once a year, we would have of course, we had a missions conference and a missions banquet. But we would also have a workers' banquet once a year. Everybody that served in the church in any capacity, from the ushers to the people that cooked meals to the people who cleaned the church, all these type of things. The food pantry, we had a daycare, we had a Christian school, all this stuff. We'd have a big old banquet, and we'd fix them a nice meal. And I think the first year or two, we tried giving everybody a gift, and it was just too expensive. So we started out with just door prizes after that. We'd get like a half a dozen nice door prizes, and, it was more of a random, whoever has the right number and stuff. But it just shows them we do appreciate them and we love them and honor them. And this way you can retain your leaders and keep them because they feel appreciated. We want to do things with excellence. I'm not talking about a spirit of perfectionism or criticism, but just simply excellence. We want to be the best we can for Jesus. And you know what? That means different things. Some my best may not be near as good as Tammy's best. You know what I'm saying? And Tammy's best might not be near as good as Terry's best. But God's just looking for me to do the best I can, to function with excellence and be prepared to carry out our best ideas, do it as well as the best thing in the church. Just try to give it the best we can. Qualities and skills desired on the missions team. Well, you want somebody that's got a good spiritual life. You want somebody who's committed to God, who's committed to the church, and a person that prays. You want someone who has leadership and organizational skills. You want somebody who really has concern for the lost. Someone who's active in church. Someone who has a cooperative spirit and a good working relationship. You know, some people are willing, but it's almost like they slow progress instead of, you know what I'm saying. And you don't want to necessarily hurt them, but you need to consider, how they fit in to this particular area of ministry. A strategic thinker, missions savvy. In other words, to have missions savvy, you've got to understand and study and be a little bit informed about missions. Flexibility, they're open to change. A learner, faithful to follow through, dependable. I remember I was a nightmare to people when I was younger as a pastor, literally. And I don't know if I'm much better now, but I used to be so adamant about people getting set in a rut that I don't know if I did. I'm sure I did do this here, but I would move chairs around from week to week. I would do all kinds of stuff intentional. So when people came in, their chair's not there no more, or this thing is different. I'm not saying that's the best way to do things, but you know what? It really worked. But yeah, you come in one Sunday, we'd have a middle aisle. The next Sunday, we'd have two aisles. The next Sunday, the chairs would be circular, Yeah, I would do stuff like that all the time because I didn't want people to get stuck in a rut. Because I've seen people. We were visiting the Orlando Christian Center back when Benny Hinn pastored it back in the, we were living here, so it would have been about 1990, 89. This is before he moved over to California and then back to Dallas where he is now. And he was the pastor. We got there, we thought we got there early enough to get a seat, and we ended up all the way in the balcony on the back row. We barely got in for that service. And then literally, like mega churches are even in Dallas, there'll be hundreds of people waiting outside for the doors to open. They'll let the first crowd out, and then all of a sudden, people fill it up, the second crowd. Well, this was like that back then at his church. Well, we just happened to be there on a Sunday morning where it was funny, but it was real. He comes up to the podium, finally, after praise and worship, and he says, in his accent, he says to his congregation and all the visitors, that whoever they were that was there, I know we were there, and apparently they have a lot because they're not that far from Disney World. And so he says, I have to say something to our people this morning. So he said, you visitors, please just excuse me. And he told him, he said, first of all, he said, I want to ask all of you on the first three rows down here. His church that church was kind of U-shaped, and then it had a big balcony, also. He said, I want all you on the first three rows down here, I want you to stand up and get your stuff. They did. He said, I want you to go to the last three rows in the balcony. He said, I want all you on the last three rows in the balcony to come down to the front. So we ended up right down front. He said, to the very front seats and fill these seats. He said, here's the problem. He said, I heard that last week, one of our regular members who did what most of you on the first three rows do every time. He said they put their Bible and their coat down to save their seat. And he said, but some visitors came in, and apparently the Bible and coat kept getting pushed down further and further, that the visitors didn't know they were sitting in these people's seats. He said, and what happened is, he's telling the congregation what happened. He said, and what happened is one of our faithful, loyal members actually drug visitors out of their seat by the hair. And he said, we don't do that here. He said, that's why all of you today are going to the back. He sent the first three rows to the back and let us come up front. And he said, we don't do that here, and we won't tolerate that here. He said, and the second thing, he said, some of you Christian people, and he said it like that, have been showing your middle finger in the parking lot. And he said, and we don't do that here. He said, we are Christian people. And he said, we wait for others to go first. And we take our time, and we consider one another, and we share the love of God. And he said, I better not hear of any more middle fingers showing up on this property. That's what he said. That's what he said. And of course, I've told this story many times over the years, but I'm like, whoa, man. There's problems to having a mega church that we don't even know about. But anyway, people just can be people sometimes. But I told that story because people get like that. They get so stuck in their ways sometimes that they can't accept growth. They can't accept that you can't sit in that same chair every week. I'm sorry, somebody might get it. And so you need changeable people, right? But anyway, moving down here to how to build a community on the missions leadership team. Well, you want to study together. Just kind of spend some time in prayer together. Pray one for another regularly. Be vulnerable. Share what God's teaching you. Get together informally for fun and fellowship. Take a ministry trip together sometime, possibly an overseas trip. Attend a conference. These ACMC conferences no longer exist. The guy that David Mays that used to sponsor these, he passed away a couple years ago. But he had some great conferences, but they don't happen anymore. Visit a missions organization headquarters. Take a tour of a needy area in your city. So these are just some suggestions. So how to model missions as a missions leadership team. And we'll just read a few of these too because there's so many of them. Develop a loving Christian community within the team. Spend time together in fun and fellowship. Learn together through videos, books, trips, and guests. There are some great videos that you can get real cheap, especially if you buy the VCR version. No, I'm joking. That was a joke. No, they're very inexpensive. You can buy online from some of these larger missions organizations that are like documentaries of different nations around the world, and they'll show you great footage of the people groups and how they live and how they worship, their false gods or what have you. And then they'll present to you on these documentaries some statistics about how many Christians are in that country, or maybe there is no Christian influence at all. It'll give you some good information. And the whole video won't be but like 4 minutes long. It feels like you're watching more than that because 4 minutes you can see a whole lot. And you can show them on Sunday morning once a month or something, and just say, this month we're going to pray for the Berbers in Morocco. Well, who's ever heard of the Berbers in Morocco? Well, they exist. And, and here's what they do on a daily basis. They show some, you watch some stuff, and they show some missionaries there, and they'll tell you how many of them are Muslim. The majority are Muslim. Is anybody a Christian? Very few. And just things. So you could say something like, so we're going to take this month, and this month will be Berber month. And so you just, in the opening prayer or something on Sunday morning, you just pray a quick prayer for the Berber people group in Morocco. But what happens? Those people all of a sudden become exposed to a part of the world, to a people group they didn't know existed, to a people who need Christ, to a people who probably have had few people pray for them before. But now this whole church body is going to pray for them every week. And guess what? When you do that, people in their personal prayer time are going to think about Morocco. They're going to think about the Berbers, and they're going to pray for them. You know what I'm saying? And they may get interested and go look them up on the internet or something. And so these are just little things that you can do to model missions, and it can really be a blessing. How to help your pastor in missions. Provide them with prayer resources. Pray for them regularly. Send them to the mission field. Arrange for missionaries to visit them. Pay their way to a conference or a class. Enlist the pastor's participation in the missions conference and committee. Provide helpful helpful missions reading materials such as clipped articles and illustrations. Here's 4 good books that would really be a blessing to a pastor. And, of course, then we've got several more like Handle the Details of Missions and so forth. And we'll jump down here to down to tips because there's some good wisdom under these tips. Don't be a pest. To be avoided. Obviously, you got to use a little bit of discreet and wisdom. You don't want to run the pastor crazy that every time he sees the missions committee member coming, he runs. But demonstrate genuine interest and involvement in other church ministries. Be patient and go slow. Don't criticize. Seek and receive permission and endorsement of all missions activities. Ask the pastor to personally promote missions publicly. Do everything for missions in a quality manner. And don't lose heart or try to work around the pastor. Affirm everything the pastor does for missions. So, you got to use wisdom, obviously, if you want to have the pastor's support. It's more important to get on the pastor's team than it is to get him on your team. So let his vision drive the missions vision. Strategy for transitioning a local church into a paradigm that includes world missions. Let's just say that maybe you're a new pastor or a new missions committee person, and you're in a church that really needs an update, really needs to make a transition even into its first real missions emphasis and program, or maybe their missions program is really outdated and really ineffective. So there can be some things that might help. Number one, intentional prayer for God's will to be done, His favor and anointing to guide through the process. Any transition, any shift in anything is always a critical moment and a critical time for that program or for that church. Number two, intentionally move slowly. People resist change, and therefore they will oppose the agent of change if we upset the apple cart too much. Believe me, I know from experience. Sometimes people will not like something that you're attempting to bring about or do, and instead of attacking what you're saying, because how can you really argue with the fact that missions is not biblical? You know what I'm saying? So, but if they feel like it's treading on something that's sacred to them, they don't want it to happen for whatever reason, they'll come after the one who is, carrying the change or the transition and attack them. So we want to be real cautious and be aware of that. Begin to share your heart and vision on an individual basis with key leaders. Equip them with an understanding of where the Lord is leading and the benefits for everyone. They're likely to support you openly and more confidently later. People just want to understand, and they often need time to process what they are learning. I learned this process even as a pastor. I always pastored churches that were different than your traditional board-run church. Until this last church I pastored, I had to shift it from a traditional denominational, Assemblies of God, deacon board-run church over to what I believe is a biblical structure. And it took 2 years to do that. But I had to learn how to work with that board so that I could get them to go along with the transition that's totally contrary to their tradition. But it wasn't an easy thing. And one of the first things the Lord showed me was what I just shared right here. He showed me that the way to make this happen is that with each new step or transition that I was moving towards to help bring the overall change, I had to go to each board member individually. And I had to share my heart with them and just kind of talk it with them. And then move to the next one and the next one and the next one. I actually had 6 when I first started. And so it would take me sometimes a month or 2 months before I could get them all of them seated in a comfortable, non-threatening environment to talk about something that was going to be radically different to them, and to basically get them thinking about it in a positive way. And then I sometimes would have 1 or 2 who wouldn't initially get on board. And I just had to pray, and I had to just kind of go back to them. One of the things the Lord showed me was not to fear them, because there's this human tendency, at least it was in me, that once somebody opposed, I just wanted to, you know what I mean? I'm going to focus on these 4, and we're just going to overpower them 2. And the Lord showed me that that's not the way to do things. That the way that I need to do things is I need to continue, because a lot of times they just don't understand yet. It just that their idea or what they're hearing is not what I'm trying to communicate. And I actually saw that process become a smooth process until we completely shifted our whole structure and everything over to a concept that's totally foreign to that denomination, which basically was a plurality of eldership, which meant that 4 of those 6 had to give up their positions of leadership, and they were willing to do it. And that's pretty radical, especially in a traditional denominational type church. You want to prepare the church's heart by preaching and teaching on missions, the Great Commission, and the rewards of outreach, and never become defensive. So communicating to the people, getting an understanding and clarity in their minds. What are we trying to do with this new missions endeavor? And help them see it. Once you have secured the support of key leadership and the board, allow some time to pass. This gives the concept time to settle in their hearts and communicates that you are not impatiently trying to ramrod something. At the appropriate time, begin to institute small changes and gradually move in that direction, making references to the work we as a church are doing globally. Let the knowledge and idea grow in their hearts A little here, a little there, line upon line, precept upon precept. People naturally take possession of the vision over time. And if someone openly opposes the process, we just respond in love with a kind of, well, why wouldn't we want to do that? And let them talk. A lot of people, sometimes they just oppose something because, well, it's never been done that way. But if you put them in a position to really have to think, why wouldn't I want to do that? Sometimes they'll come to a realization, well, why wouldn't I want to do that? Just by calling them on it. Missionaries are born in the local church. They're not found or recruited out of thin air. Individuals need the guidance of a local church and a pastor to bring them into an understanding of what God is doing in their lives. There's no better place to receive the nurture and training a minister needs. The local church. In the local church, there are mature leaders who can bring us to passion, purpose, and practice of a calling. Integrating missions into every church ministry. Here's some assumptions. The Great Commission is part of the primary purpose of the church. The purpose of the whole church is the purpose of the every part. Therefore, the purpose of the church affects every ministry of the church. The purpose of the church directs every ministry of the church. So purpose is everything. Why do we exist? What are we trying to accomplish here? The Great Commission includes three kinds of people. That is, people who are nearby, people unlike us nearby. First one should be people like us nearby. And thirdly, people unlike us far away. So there's three kinds of people that are addressed in the Great Commission that we see here. So, some questions for developing and executing a plan. And here's a few of those. What are some things your church leaders want everyone to do? Well, we'd like for people to begin to pray for missions. We'd like for people to, in their worships, to remember that different people around the world are worshiping God, and different people around the world are called to worship God who don't know Jesus yet. And so we have a responsibility to play in this. Caring for others, reading the Bible, grow as disciples, developing character. In other words, we want to encourage the people to let missions become a part of who they are as a Christian and involve the Christian aspects of our life. How do they get people to do these things? Well, through encouragement, through reminders, through not becoming weary in well-doing. It takes time to get people on board. What are some things your small groups want everyone to do? Come to the meeting, study the lesson, pray, exercise spiritual gifts. The only small group you may have may just be the committee when it meets and has a devotion and prays. But even in that light, you want those involved in mission to think about this. What if you have cell groups or care groups or something? You want missions to be mentioned or to at least be considered and thought of even in those small groups. How do they get them to do these things? How are we going to accomplish this with the people? How can we use these principles to get everyone in each ministry to participate in missions? So as you ponder these questions, you can come up with solutions that apply and fit to your church and your people. There are two types of missions involvement that can be integrated. The first one is mobilization, and then the next one is deployment. Mobilization is getting people ready, educating, praying, recruiting, training, strategizing, influencing, and promoting. Deployment is actually meeting, relating, witnessing, ministering, serving, doing, going, and so forth. So mobilization gets them ready, and deployment actually gets them there doing it. Gets them active, yes, in the ministry of missions. And think about it this way. If we had an intentional mobilization and deployment strategy, there would be people in our church that maybe for the first time in their life would become interested in missions, interested in the lost in other places. And all of a sudden, you would have a active missions program. You'd have some people who were actually thinking and praying about God maybe calling me to missions. You'd have a lot of people possibly who might consider adding a little something to their giving every week for missions. And they just never thought about it before because nobody ever mobilized them. Nobody ever encouraged them to be deployed in some aspect of missions. And so they may think, well, I could give $5 a month. I can give $10 a month. I can give $50 a month. It's not about the size. It's just about the fact that I want to be a part of what God's doing in the nations of the world. So what are the ministries of your church? Make a list. Who are individuals in each ministry who might assist in integrating missions in that ministry? I remember, I grew up as a little Baptist boy. Man, everything that you were part of, they talked about missionaries. I can remember that as a boy. I went to Royal Rangers program. I went to Sunday school regularly. Everything was always about missions. In our Sunday school, I don't know what the adults did, but in the little boys' Sunday school, way back then, it was separated. All the boys went to a man teacher, and the girls went to a girl teacher. But we're talking in the old days. But I remember when I got saved at 9. I can remember the teacher. And I don't know why he made such an impression on me, but he's the one who basically led me to the Lord, but he also told me I had to go down and shake the preacher's hand. So, but anyway, I remember he was an elderly man. But we would give our Sunday school offering, which we'd bring nickels and dimes and quarters, whatever Mom and Daddy would give us, for the Sunday school offering. And our Sunday school offering in our class went to a missionary. And of course, we weren't bringing much money, but he would always talk about the missionary. And I can remember him, I don't know why he did it, but he always would roll a quarter in his finger with his thumb. You know what I mean? Just kind of like this when he would talk. And I can still see that old man rolling that quarter in his finger when we were all getting our pennies and nickels and dimes and stuff out to give the Sunday school offering to go to the missionary. And he'd talk about missions for a few minutes, And I can remember that. And to this day, it made an impact on me. And to the point to where, man, I'm all about missions still today. I just believe it's important. For each ministry, ask for people like you nearby. In other words, people in our community, people, same culture and everything. What are some ways you and your ministry can mobilize and prepare to reach out? What are some ways you and your ministry can deploy or actually do it? For people unlike you, you ask, same thing basically. What are some ways that you and your ministry can mobilize? And what are some ways that you and your ministry can deploy? Same things. What can we do? It is a reality that a church with 1,000 people is going to have more resources, more people called to missions, more finances. So it's not a sin to be relative, you know what I mean? And say, hey, we don't have 1,000 people here. But there are things we can do. There's something we can do. Amen. Well, what about people unlike you far away? What are some ways that we can mobilize, and what are some ways that we can deploy to help these people? And then kind of set some time frames on it. What about between now and the next 6 months? What about this? What about that? And see what happens. Missionaries have been supported forever with change, and it still works. I know the Assemblies of God still to this day buy vehicles with change. They encourage, people to save up their change, and they'll buy Jeeps and, trucks and stuff for missionaries with change. Now, obviously, they have hundreds and hundreds of churches all contributing, but it all builds up. Yep. Who? Yes. Yes. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, I think they call it Speed the Light. Yeah. That just popped in my mind. Yeah. Huh? That's a Baptist woman right there. Lottie Moon, that's the Baptist, yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing it's kind of like what you guys do. That's a missions effort. People put money in that box and then you help them family. Well, that's a community outreach missions endeavor. And so it's amazing what a little one do when we're all contributing. Believe me, the tax guy knows that. He'll get them to raise your road tax a few cents or this tax a little bit, and it's like, we feel like, well, it could have been worse, it could have been $100, but in reality, the dude's, he just increased his budget immensely, So it's not so much, well, the way John Keith used to put it, before he died, he used to say, it's not about equal gifts, it's about equal sacrifice. And, and that, I've always thought that was good. We can't all give the same thing, but we can all do something. And when we just do something, it's amazing what amazing things can happen. That's right. Yeah, it's really true. Do you know that in the United States, less than 1% of all church income goes to world missions? Yeah, less than 1%. Let's see. There's some suggestions that can help us prepare a mission strategy. And I'm not going to I don't think I'm even going to bother to read those because you can read them for yourself. And they're kind of, a lot of it's repeat of the things we've already talked about. But I want to move to this section here, marrying the church membership to world mission, section 3, casting vision for a world-class church. People tend to go where they're directed, where they see a future and potential. The pastor and other key leaders have the privilege of casting a vision of expectancy and hope. Our destiny is greater than we can imagine without help. God inspires men with vision to impart to the congregation so they can perceive their real purpose and in the individuals and as a local church body. Once we have a vision for missions, it's essential to build a foundation from God's Word in the hearts and psyche of our people. Having a clear biblical basis for a vision gives faith to people's hearts and assurance to their minds, allowing them to relax and listen to the Holy Spirit. Casting vision requires a strategy to be effective and bring people to their destiny. We need to unite the local church membership and world missions in an external relationship of love. Missions is accomplished through long-term commitment. This commitment to a nation or a people group is only fulfilled if on the other side there are churches and individuals equally covenanted to finish the work that Christ began. Together we partner for the final harvest. The mindset of many members is out of sight, out of mind. This attitude needs to be rejected, for it's a threat to our destiny and the potential harvest. How will we accomplish this challenge of marrying busy people to something that they must not realize they need? We shall do it by casting vision for a world-class church, by communicating our vision through all avenues available, by conditioning our services, worship, prayers, and entire environment around this goal. We must provide home missions opportunities while weaving the Great Commission into every age group and program of the local church. We must become entirely missions-minded. So how are we going to raise this missions profile in our church? Churches, they say, have a skyline like cities. In other words, visibility. Visible programs that make up its major recognizable features. Raising the profile means raising the visibility, exposure, and awareness of missions to congregations. To the congregation. It means giving missions a warm, positive, familiar feel to the people. A sense that this is part of what home is like. The profile is high when visitors notice it. So missions tend to have a low profile because people usually aren't looking for it. It's not natural to our human nature. It doesn't fit our cultural values. It doesn't meet our pressing needs.